Now I'm cutting a rabbet in the back of the maple into which the center vertical panel will fit. I'm using my router with a straight bit. I've got a guide board set here so that the router can simply run up against the guide board to get the right depth of the cut. And I've got my router so I can hook it up to my vacuum and thereby pick up all the shavings that come off so they don't get all over the place. Now I'm going to use the router table with the straight cut bit to cut the rabbets in the sides of these vertical pillars. I've set the height of this bit to be the same as the depth of the rabbet that I made on the maple planks. And I will make these cuts in two or three passes so I don't take too much bite at one time, moving the fence back for each subsequent pass. I've got a fence over my blade to help keep my fingers away from the blade and also give me something to ride on. So we'll go ahead and cut these rabbets. I'm making the wedges to go into the tenons, and the depth of the kerf that I cut in the tenon, it goes 2 1/4 inches. I calculated the wedge angle that would be best for the wedges, and I came up with 2 degrees. So the question is, how do you cut a wedge that's 2 1/4 inches deep, 2 degrees, and the full width of the tenon, which is the widest wedges would be 2 3/4 inches. What I did was I made a simple wedge, glued a little stop block on there, and set my bandsaw fence at just the right distance from the wedge, where if I take my block and run it through the bandsaw, I end up with a pretty good point on the end of the wedge, and the opposite end of the wedge, the fat end, is wider than the kerf. So we'll just go ahead and show you how this works. It's pretty simple. I've made up quite a few blocks so that I don't have to worry about getting my fingers too close to the blade. And to make sure the wedges that I cut would fit correctly, I did a little dry test. Take a wedge, put her in the kerf, take another one, put it in the kerf. Just hand fitting them, I can get about half the depth of the wedge, and when it comes time to glue up, I'll just tap these home with a mallet just to make a nice snug fit. I'll also cut wedges to go crossways, so we'll get the complete wedging that we need. Now I'm going to get the maple planks ready for finishing. First thing I want to do is smooth up the ends. Make sure that these ears that were glued on are nice and coplanar with the main planks. There is a little bit of an edge there. So I'm going to use a low angle plane. This iron in this plane is ground to only 25 degrees. Typically a plain iron would be, in a plane like this, would be ground more like 35 degrees, so it's more like a knife in the way it cuts, and the iron sits really at a low angle to the body of the, to the sole of the plane. And so it cuts kind of like a knife. Now I'm cutting end grain here. So basically, imagine you're holding a fistful of soda straws. You're cutting straight across those straws, making them all a little bit shorter. And by using that low angle iron, nice and sharp, I get these paper thin shavings of end grain. Kind of neat. You notice I'm holding the plane at a bit of an angle, askew, as I plane down. That makes the angle of attack of the blade even less, so it's even more like a knife. I ran the math on that once to prove to myself that that's really what's happening, but probably couldn't do that now. Now I want to get a close-up to show you just how nice a job that plane does. You can see there was some ambrosia beetles in this wood, and you can see the tracks of their chemical that they leave behind that colors the wood. The joint here is practically invisible, and you see this nice pretty end grain. Now I'll do all these ends, and then I'll go sharpen the plane iron again. Come back and just give one just really light little pass, and that'll be it. I probably won't even sand, because these fibers are cut off so cleanly that it just makes it beautiful. Now here's one of these little details I want to point out when you're making a very nice custom piece. You see how nicely this defect in the wood flows right on up through at a nice even angle on the side of this mantle? Well, in fact, that's not really the case. As I remove this little piece of tape that I put on, there's the actual corner of the block I had glued on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut off this little corner with carving chisels, put a little grain into it with the chisels, and then using some dye pens match the color of this bark, so that, from a little bit of a distance, it will be a nice blending curve there instead of this sharp angle. The first step will be to use a hand saw, to cut away most of the waste so that I'm not struggling with a chisel for longer than I have to. Okay, there most of the waste is gone. Now I'll use a 6mm number 7 gouge to just gently take away the material, leaving a little bit of a concave surface. I want to make it look natural. And there we are. Nice textured edge there. It's not exactly bark, but when we put the brown pencil stain on there, it'll blend in very nicely. Now I'm going to go back to working on the laminated, curved, veneered pieces that go between the sides of the vertical stretchers, or vertical pillars. And first step is, you guessed it, sanding. I'm going to sand this down to become like this. I want to get it fairly smooth. I want to make sure I don't have any ridges where the glue joints are between the pieces of veneer. And but I got to be very careful that I don't sand through the very thin veneer at the same time. So I'll be using my Rotex sander to rough this up and then finish up with hand sanding. I'll be starting my sanding operation using the Festool Rotex sander on the random orbit mode. And I'm starting out with 120 grit sandpaper, being very ginger in my application of pressure. I'm really just trying to get the high spots, smooth out a little bit, remove any excess glue, that kind of thing, and then I'll work my way up to 320 grit sandpaper. I finish up with sanding with a 320 grit on a felt block on my downdraft table to collect all the dust. Now I want to point out, I haven't trimmed these pieces to fit into the mantle yet. They're still oversized. The reason I did the sanding before trimming was that I didn't want to oversand the outside edges. It's very easy to oversand the outside edges and come through. So if I, sand first and then trim off whatever I need to trim off, I'm sure to have a nice even surface when I'm all done.